Captain Mira Shen clung to the shuttle's overhead grip as another impact rocked the vessel, sending sparks cascading from the navigation console. Through the viewport, the sulphurous clouds of Kos parted to reveal jagged spires of obsidian rock jutting from a sea of crimson vegetation. "Stabilizers failing! We're losing altitude control!" The pilot's voice cracked as his hands danced across the holographic interface. "Something's locked onto our hull." Mira braced against the bulkhead, feeling the ship lurch violently to starboard. "Rourke, status on the defense grid?" Lieutenant Rourke Roar Malloy, a man whose weathered face bore scars from a dozen frontier skirmishes, grimaced as he worked the weapons console. "Offline. Whatever's hit us has compromised the primary systems." A third figure stumbled forward, thin fingers gripping a sample case with white knuckles. Dr. Elias Vorn, the mission's xenobiologist, looked pale even in the red emergency lighting. "Captain, the atmospheric readings are off the charts. The ship's sensors must be—" His words dissolved into a scream as the viewport suddenly filled with glistening obsidian. A massive limb, something between stone and chitin, punched through the reinforced glass, impaling the pilot through his chest. Blood sprayed across the instrument panel as the creature retracted, dragging the pilot's body into the howling maelstrom outside. "Containment breach!" Mira shouted, drawing her plasma pistol. "Rourke, seal the cockpit!" But it was too late. The decompression alarms wailed as the shuttle began to tumble, its navigation system shredded. Through the fractured viewport, Mira caught glimpses of their attacker, a colossal arthropoid creature with a carapace like volcanic rock, its multiple limbs ending in crystalline hooks. It wasn't alone. At least 3 more silhouettes circled the failing vessel, moving with predatory coordination that sent a chill down her spine. "They're hunting in packs," she whispered, the realization sinking in. "And they set a trap." Rourke slammed his fist against the emergency evacuation panel. "Escape pods ready, but we've got 30 seconds before this bird breaks apart." Dr. Vorn clutched his sample case, eyes wide with terror and something else, a flicker of calculation that Mira filed away for later consideration. "The Kosian biosphere is completely unstable. We can't possibly survive out there." Mira grabbed him by the collar, dragging him toward the escape hatch. "Your corporate masters said this planet was uninhabitable, Doctor. Seems they were wrong about a lot of things." She made the decision in a heartbeat, the kind that had kept her alive through years of corporate security operations gone wrong. Eject. Aim for the abyssal jungle sector. Those flying bastards seem to prefer the upper atmosphere. As the escape pod rocketed away from the disintegrating shuttle, Mira watched through the tiny porthole as their expedition vessel, a state-of-the-art explorer worth more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes, was torn apart by creatures that shouldn't exist on a world classified as too dangerous for standardized threat assessment. The irony wasn't lost on her as gravity claimed their pod, sending them plummeting toward a landscape straight out of humanity's darkest nightmares. Somewhere in the depths of that alien hell, they would need to survive long enough to signal for extraction. If extraction was even possible. If someone would even bother coming for them. The pod crashed through layers of crimson canopy, its heat shields blazing as primitive shock absorbers fought to compensate for the brutal descent. The last thing Mira saw before impact was Dr. Vorn's hand slipping into an inner pocket of his envirosuit, a gesture too deliberate to be fear-driven. Then darkness. Consciousness returned with the taste of copper and the hiss of escaping pressure. Mira's eyes snapped open to find the pod's interior bathed in the eerie blue glow of emergency lighting. Her head throbbed where it had struck the restraint cushioning, but a quick self-assessment confirmed no major injuries. "System check," she croaked, her training asserting itself through the fog of impact trauma. "Alive, barely." Rourke's voice came from her right, strained but steady. The ex-Marine was already cutting himself free from tangled harness straps, with a vibroblade. A laceration above his eye had painted half his face with blood, but the wound itself had already clotted. Vorn's unconscious but breathing. Mira unclipped her harness and moved to the pod's systems terminal. Environmental readings? Bad news across the board, Captain. Rourke nodded toward the external sensor display. Atmosphere's got enough oxygen to breathe, but it's laced with sulfuric compounds that'll corrode our lungs within hours without filtration, temperatures fluctuating between 30 and 45 Celsius. And there's something else. Biometric sensors are going haywire. Either they're damaged or everything out there is alive and moving. Mira finished, pulling her emergency pack from its compartment. Inside was a standard Frontier survival kit, rebreather mask with 8 hours of filters, water purification tabs, medical nanogel, a multi-tool, emergency rations, and her personal addition, a high-caliber kinetic sidearm with 3 magazines of armor-piercing rounds. Corporate security hadn't believed in taking chances. A groan from the floor announced Dr. Vorn's return to consciousness. The xenobiologist struggled to sit up, immediately checking the sample case still clutched in his arms. "Samples intact, Doctor?" Mira asked, not bothering to hide the edge in her voice. Vorn blinked up at her, adjusting cracked spectacles. "These specimens could revolutionize our understanding of xenobiology. Captain, their value to science is incalculable. Right now, I'm more concerned with our survival." Mira checked the pod's communication array, cursing under her breath at the damage report. "Transmitters down. We'll need to activate the emergency beacon manually." She pulled the compact device from its housing, a silver cylinder no larger than her forearm. Standard procedure was to activate it immediately, broadcasting their coordinates to any corporate or Federation vessel within range. But something made her hesitate, the memory of Vorn's furtive movement before the crash. "I'll hold on to this for now," she said, securing the beacon to her belt. "Let's assess our situation first." Rourke had moved to the pod's single viewport, wiping condensation from the reinforced glass. "You might want to see this, Captain." Mira joined him, and for a moment, all thoughts of corporate conspiracies vanished. Beyond the cracked viewport lay a landscape both beautiful and terrifying, a primeval jungle of vegetation that defied categorization. Trees like towering fungal structures pulsed with bioluminescent veins. The ground undulated with what appeared to be a carpet of crimson moss, but which rippled and flowed like liquid. In the distance, obsidian spires jutted from the landscape, their surfaces glistening with an oily iridescence. "Those flying rock creatures," Rourke murmured. "They're perched on the spires." Mira followed his gaze to see the silhouettes of their attackers, motionless now, their crystalline limbs folded against volcanic carapaces. They seemed to be waiting. "We need to move," she decided. "This pod's a beacon for every predator in the vicinity." "Move where?" Vorn demanded, his voice rising. "This entire planet is a death trap. The atmospheric toxicity alone is why we have rebreathers." Mira cut him off, tossing him one from the emergency supplies. 8 hours of filtered air. By then, we either find shelter or become part of the local food chain. Rourke was already assembling a makeshift weapon from pod components, a length of support strut fashioned into a spear, its tip sharpened and hardened with a brief application of the emergency welding tool. "I've survived worse odds in the Centauri Rebellion," he said with a grim smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Have you?" Mira arched an eyebrow, beginning to appreciate the ex-Marine's psychological armor of gallows humor. "No," he admitted, testing the spear's balance, "but saying so makes me feel better." Dr. Vorn reluctantly donned his rebreather, still clutching his precious sample case. "The corporation will send a rescue team once they lose contact with the shuttle," he said. Though something in his tone lacked conviction, Mira made a final check of their supplies, distributing them between 3 packs. Then let's make sure we're alive when they arrive. Rourke, you're on point. Doctor, stay between us and keep your eyes open. We've already seen these things can set ambushes. The pod's hatch released with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and the full assault of Coes hit them like a physical force. Heat, humidity, and the acrid scent of alien biochemistry that penetrated even their rebreathers. The crimson moss-like growth squelched beneath their boots, releasing luminescent spores that drifted upward like embers. "Step where I step," Rourke warned, testing each footfall before committing his weight. "This stuff reacts to pressure." They had barely made it 20 meters from the pod when a distant screech echoed across the jungle canopy. The sound was followed by the beating of what could only be described as stone wings. "They're coming," Mira said, drawing her sidearm. "Move!" The trio plunged deeper into the alien forest, pursuit driving them forward as the light began to fade from Kose's crimson sky. The jungle grew denser, the bioluminescent veins of the fungal trees providing their only illumination. Twice they were forced to change direction as the ground ahead liquefied into pools of digestive enzymes. Once, Rourke barely pulled Dr. Vorn back in time as a vine-like appendage lashed down from the canopy, its barbed tip missing the xenobiologist by centimeters. "The whole damn planet's trying to eat us," Rourke panted, his makeshift spear now stained with the phosphorescent ichor of a creature that had resembled a cross between a centipede and a fern. Mira checked her wrist display, grimacing at the environmental readings. "We've got maybe 5 hours of filter capacity left. We need to find shelter, someplace defensible." As if in answer, the jungle canopy thinned ahead, revealing one of the obsidian spires they'd glimpsed from a distance. Up close, the structure was even more imposing, a natural formation of volcanic glass that twisted upward like a frozen tornado, its surface etched with patterns too regular to be random erosion. "Those look like—" Dr. Vorn trailed off, adjusting his cracked spectacles. "Glyphs," Mira finished, holstering her weapon to run her fingers over the markings. "Someone's been carving into these spires." "Or something," Rourke added, keeping his spear ready as he scanned the perimeter. The ground trembled beneath them, a subtle vibration that rapidly intensified. The crimson moss carpet began to pulse with agitated bioluminescence, and from the jungle behind them came the splintering crash of falling fungal trees. "Inside!" Mira shouted, spotting a fissure in the spire's base wide enough to admit them. "Move!" They squeezed through the opening just as the forest erupted in chaos. Through the narrow gap, they glimpsed a nightmarish scene. The flying rock creatures had returned, but they weren't the hunters this time. A massive serpentine form, its segmented body covered in chitinous plates that shifted colors like oil on water, burst from beneath the crimson carpet. It rose impossibly high, jaws like serrated obsidian snapping at the aerial predators. "Ambush predator," Dr. Vorn whispered, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. "It used our movement to flush out its prey." "Comforting," Rourke muttered, wedging himself deeper into the fissure as the battle raged outside. The interior of the spire widened into a roughly circular chamber, its walls glittering with embedded crystals that caught and amplified the dim light filtering through the entrance. More glyphs covered the interior surfaces, some fresh enough that crystalline dust still clung to the etchings. Mira activated her wrist light, illuminating the chamber fully. "We're not alone on this rock." In the center of the chamber stood a crude altar of stacked obsidian shards. Atop it rested objects that sent a chill through Mira's spine, primitive tools fashioned from the same crystalline material as the flying predator's claws, fabric woven from fibers that resembled the bioluminescent veins of the fungal trees, and most disturbingly, a ceremonial mask carved from what appeared to be the carapace of one of their aerial attackers. Sentient native life, Dr. Vorn breathed, his earlier terror giving way to academic excitement. The corporate survey missed an entire civilization. Or they didn't miss it at all, Mira said quietly, the pieces falling into place. What's a planet rich in rare minerals worth if it's inhabited by a protected sentient species? Nothing but an uninhabitable death world that happens to be mineral-rich. That's worth billions in extraction rights. Vorn's expression flickered, that same calculating look she'd noticed on the shuttle. That's a serious accusation. Captain, Cortex Dynamics follows all Federation protocols for— Save it, Mira cut him off. I've worked corporate security long enough to know how these things operate. The real question is, what did they promise you to keep quiet if you found evidence? Before Vorn could respond, Rourke hissed a warning from his position near the entrance. Movement outside, not the flyers or the serpent. Mira deuced her light immediately, drawing her sidearm as she moved to flank the entrance. Rourke positioned himself on the opposite side, his makeshift spear at the ready. Dr. Vorn retreated deeper into the chamber, clutching his sample case like a shield. The sounds from outside changed, no longer the chaotic fury of predators locked in combat, but something more deliberate, scraping, clicking, a rhythmic cadence that raised the hairs on Mira's neck. Communication. A shadow fell across the entrance, and Mira tightened her finger on the trigger. The figure that appeared in the fissure was unlike anything in her experience, a bipedal form nearly 2 meters tall, with 6 limbs arranged in a configuration that defied human anatomical logic. Its body was covered in a natural armor of interlocking plates that shifted hues like the serpentine predator they'd witnessed, while its elongated head featured compound eyes that captured and reflected light in prismatic patterns. For a heartbeat, the creature and humans stared at each other in mutual shock. Then everything happened at once. The creature emitted a high-pitched whistle as it backpedaled. Rourke lunged forward with his spear, the instincts of a career soldier overriding caution. Mira shouted a warning, recognizing the whistle not as aggression, but as an alarm call. Too late. The spear glanced off the creature's shifting armor as it twisted with inhuman agility. 2 of its upper limbs seized the weapon, while a lower pair drew what could only be described as ceremonial daggers from sheaths along its torso. Rourke, stand down, Mira barked, keeping her sidearm trained on the creature but not firing. It's intelligent, it's tooled, and it's not alone. The ex-Marine froze, combat awareness catching up to his reflexes as more shadows appeared beyond the fissure, at least 5 more of the multi-limbed beings, each armed with primitive but effective weapons. We're outnumbered, Rourke acknowledged, slowly releasing his grip on the spear and raising his hands in a universal gesture of surrender. The first creature held the spear with its upper limbs, compound eyes shifting as it studied the unfamiliar design. It chittered something to its companions, the sound like stones sliding against metal. Mira made a decision. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered her weapon and held up empty palms. "We mean no harm," she said, knowing the words were meaningless but hoping the tone might translate. The creature's head tilted, compound eyes focusing on her face. Then, with movements that seemed almost ritualistic, it returned Rourke's spear but reversed, offering the handle rather than the point. "A test," Mira murmured, nodding to Rourke. "Take it carefully." The ex-Marine accepted the weapon with the same deliberate movements, then mimicked the creature's earlier gesture, offering it back handle first. For a moment, tension crackled in the chamber like static electricity. Then the creature made a sound unlike its previous communications, a series of rapid clicks that somehow conveyed amusement. It waved the spear away, instead extending one of its middle limbs in what was unmistakably an invitation to touch. "I think we just passed first contact protocols," Mira said, cautiously reaching out to press her palm against the creature's offered appendage. The texture was smooth, like polished stone, but warm and slightly yielding, with micro-articulations that rippled beneath the surface. From the back of the chamber, Dr. Vorn finally found his voice. "Remarkable. Their biochemistry must be silicon-based rather than carbon, allowing them to adapt to Kosa's extreme conditions, and the color-shifting plates, some form of communication or camouflage." The lead creature's attention shifted to Vorn, compound eyes focusing on the sample case he still clutched. With surprising speed, it crossed the chamber, two of its limbs extending toward the xenobiologist. Vorn recoiled, but the creature merely tapped the case with delicate precision, then made a series of sounds while its body plates shifted through a complex pattern of colors. "I think it wants to know what's inside," Mira suggested, moving slowly to Vorn's side. The xenobiologist hesitated, then reluctantly opened the case to reveal its contents, carefully preserved specimens of Kosian flora and microfauna, along with soil and liquid samples. The creature leaned forward, compound eyes adjusting as it studied each specimen. Then it reached past them to touch a small device nestled in the case's lining, a compact data recorder with the Cortex Dynamics logo emblazoned on its casing. In a movement too fast to counter, the creature plucked the device from the case and skittered backward, chittering excitedly to its companions as it held up the corporate technology. "Wait!" Dr. Vorn lunged forward, panic overriding caution. "That contains vital research data." The creature's body plates flared red, and its companions moved to block the entrance, weapons raised. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted from cautious first contact to imminent violence in an instant. Mira grabbed Vorn's arm, yanking him back. "Stand down, Doctor. That's an order." "You don't understand," Vorn hissed, genuine fear in his eyes. "If they damage that recorder, then your corporate paymasters lose their precious data," Mira finished coldly. "That's not our priority right now." The lead creature was examining the recorder, manipulating it with surprising dexterity. To Mira's shock, it pressed the activation sequence correctly, and the device hummed to life, projecting a holographic display. "They've seen our technology before," Rourke muttered, moving to Mira's side. The hologram stabilized, displaying a three-dimensional geological survey of the region, specifically a detailed analysis of mineral deposits concentrated in the obsidian spires. The creature's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Its body plates cycled rapidly through patterns of red and black, while its vocal apparatus emitted a sound that needed no translation: rage. "I'm guessing those spires are more than just pretty landmarks to them," Rourke said grimly. Dr. Vorn had gone very still, his earlier panic replaced by resignation. "The spires contain the highest concentration of stellarite ore in the sector," he admitted quietly, "extremely valuable for quantum drive components. The corporate survey indicated that a targeted extraction operation could yield billions in revenue." "Targeted extraction," Mira repeated, the pieces falling into place. "You mean strip mining of structures that are clearly sacred to an intelligent species?" The creatures were communicating rapidly among themselves, their plates shifting through complex patterns as the recorder's hologram continued to display the survey data. The tension in the chamber was palpable, the natives' weapons still raised. Mira made a decision. Moving slowly, she drew the emergency beacon from her belt and held it up where all could see it. "Dr. Vorn," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "when were you planning to sabotage our distress call?" The xenobiologist flinched as if struck. "I don't know what you're—" "Save it," Mira cut him off. "I saw you reach for something right before the crash. The flying predators attacked our shuttle with too much precision for a random encounter, and you've been too concerned about that data recorder and not concerned enough about our survival." She turned the beacon over in her hands, finding what she expected, a small modification to the circuitry that would render the device useless while still appearing to function normally. "Amateur work, Doctor. Corporate espionage isn't your strong suit." The natives had gone silent, compound eyes tracking the exchange with unnerving focus. "It's not what you think," Vorn protested, sweat beading on his forehead despite the environmental controls in his suit. "Cortex Dynamics just needed time to send an extraction team with proper equipment. If the Federation responds to an emergency beacon first, they'll discover the native population and place the entire planet under protection status, leaving your employers without their payday." Mira nodded. "How much did they offer you? A research division of your own, stock options, a place in the executive suite?" "You're a security specialist, Captain," Vorn said, desperation edging into his voice. "You understand how these operations work. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for progress." "I understand exactly how it works," Mira replied, memories of other corporate sacrifices flashing behind her eyes. "That's why I quit." She turned to the lead native, holding up the sabotaged beacon. Then, with deliberate movements, she removed the damaged component and reactivated the device. A soft pulse of blue light confirmed it was now broadcasting their coordinates on all emergency frequencies. The creature watched this process with its unreadable compound eyes, head tilted in what might have been curiosity. Then it stepped forward, reaching out with 3 limbs simultaneously, one touching the functioning beacon, one touching Mira's face just below her rebreather, and one extending toward Rourke in what seemed like an invitation. "I think we're being invited to go with them," Mira said, glancing at the ex-Marine, "unless you'd prefer to take your chances with the flying rock monsters and carnivorous moss." Rourke shrugged, the ghost of a smile visible beneath his rebreather. "When on Kos, do as the Kosians do." Dr. Vorn's face had gone pale. "You can't be serious. These creatures could be taking us to be sacrificed. Or worse." "You're welcome to stay here alone, Doctor," Mira offered coldly, "but the beacon stays with us." The choice was made for them. As the ground trembled again, more violently this time, dust and crystalline fragments showered from the chamber ceiling as a terrible screeching sound penetrated the spire walls. The lead Kosian chittered urgently to its companions, who immediately began moving through the fissure entrance. It gestured emphatically for the humans to follow, its body plates pulsing with patterns that somehow conveyed urgency even to alien eyes. "Time to go," Mira decided, securing the beacon to her belt again. "Rourke, bring our reluctant scientist." The ex-Marine gripped Dr. Vorn's arm firmly. "Come on, Doc, field trip time." They emerged from the spire into a landscape transformed by Hos's version of twilight. The bioluminescent elements of the jungle had intensified, bathing everything in ghostly blue-green light. The crimson moss carpet pulsed with patterns that seemed to flow toward the spire, while the fungal trees had closed their canopies, bioluminescent veins glowing through translucent membranes. The Kosians moved with practiced efficiency, forming a protective formation around the humans as they led them away from the spire. Their body plates had shifted to patterns that blended with the bioluminescent landscape, rendering them nearly invisible except for the occasional glint of compound eyes. They traveled for what felt like hours, the alien landscape becoming increasingly surreal as Hos's natural rhythms adjusted to the absence of direct sunlight. Floating spores created phantom constellations above the canopy. Creatures that resembled a cross between jellyfish and bats drifted between the fungal trees, trailing tendrils that sparked with bioelectrical discharges. "Beautiful," Mira found herself murmuring, despite the danger, in a terrifying sort of way. Rourke grunted agreement, still maintaining his grip on Dr. Vorn, who had lapsed into sullen silence. The lead Hosian, whom Mira had mentally dubbed Guide, suddenly raised all 6 limbs in a stopping gesture. The party froze as a new sound penetrated the jungle ambience, a low, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to resonate through the ground itself. Engines, Rourke identified immediately. Heavy-duty atmospheric thrusters. Mira felt her heart rate accelerate. Rescue already? The beacon hasn't been active long enough for a Federation response. Not rescue, Dr. Vorn said quietly. Cortex Dynamics maintains a forward operating base on Kos's 3rd moon. They've been monitoring our mission from the beginning. Guide chittered softly, leading them to the edge of a massive clearing that hadn't been visible through the dense canopy. What they saw there confirmed Vorn's words, a corporate dropship, its hull emblazoned with the Cortex Dynamics logo, had already landed on a natural plateau. Armored personnel were deploying perimeter defenses, while others operated heavy equipment that appeared designed for mineral extraction. They're not waiting for Federation clearance, Mira realized, the corporate strategy becoming clear. They're going to start mining operations immediately, claim they didn't detect any intelligent life, and present the Federation with a fait accompli. Standard corporate procedure for frontier worlds, Rourke confirmed grimly. By the time bureaucracy catches up, the damage is done and the profits are banked. Guide was observing the corporate activity, its body plates shifting through patterns of deep red and black. Its companions had similar reactions, their weapons clutched tightly in multiple limbs. They're going to attack, Mira warned, recognizing the pre-combat tension in the natives' posture. 6 of them against a fortified corporate position with at least 20 armed personnel. It'll be a massacre. She caught Guide's attention, mimicking its earlier stopping gesture with raised hands. Then she pointed to the dropship, made a cutting motion across her throat, and shook her head emphatically. Guide's compound eyes focused on her face, its head tilting in that now familiar gesture of consideration. It chittered something to its companions, who seemed to object based on their agitated movements. But Guide was evidently the leader. After a brief but intense exchange, the others reluctantly lowered their weapons. Instead, Guide made a series of gestures indicating they should follow again, leading them along the clearing's perimeter until the corporate dropship was no longer visible. The jungle grew denser here, the bioluminescent elements more subdued, creating pools of near darkness between illuminated patches. "Where are they taking us?" Dr. Vorn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere safe, I hope," Mira replied, though her instincts were screaming caution. They were being led deeper into unknown territory, away from potential rescue by creatures whose intentions remained unclear. Yet something about Guide's demeanor, the careful way it had prevented a suicidal attack on the corporate forces, the apparent concern for their human captives' well-being, suggested an intelligence that transcended the primitive tools and appearance. After another hour of increasingly difficult travel, they emerged into a vast underground cavern accessed through a narrow fissure in the jungle floor. The space within defied expectations, a cathedral-like chamber whose walls glittered with the same crystalline formations they'd seen in the spire, but on a massive scale. Bioluminescent fungi grew in carefully tended patterns, providing illumination that reflected and refracted through the crystal lattices to create an ethereal glow. And they weren't alone. Dozens of Kosians moved throughout the space, engaged in activities that spoke of a complex society, tending to growing areas where the bioluminescent fungi were being cultivated, working on what appeared to be primitive but effective weapons, and most surprisingly, gathered around what could only be described as teaching areas, where younger Hosians observed elders manipulating objects in what appeared to be demonstrations. A full colony, Mira breathed, taking in the scene, not just a hunting party. Impossible, Dr. Vorn muttered, scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his fear. The corporate survey found no evidence of settlements, no electromagnetic signatures, no thermal footprints. Because they live underground, in naturally insulated chambers, Rourke pointed out, and their technology isn't based on our principles. Look, no electricity, no combustion, it's all biological, mechanical. Their arrival had not gone unnoticed. The cavern's activities paused as Kosians turned to observe the alien visitors, body plates shifting through patterns that Mira was beginning to recognize as expressions of emotion, curiosity, caution, and in some cases what appeared to be hostility. Guide led them to the center of the chamber, where a raised platform of crystalline material served as a gathering point. There, a Kosian distinguished from the others by elaborate patterns etched into its body plates, waited, surrounded by what appeared to be advisors or elders. The formal exchange that followed was incomprehensible to the humans, but the ceremonial nature was unmistakable. Guide presented them with gestures that somehow conveyed both caution and respect, while the elder Kosian, clearly some form of leader, inspected each human in turn with unnerving intensity. When it reached Dr. Vorn, the leader's reaction was immediate and alarming. Its body plates flared with patterns of deep crimson, and it emitted a series of sharp clicks that caused the surrounding Kosians to step back. "What's happening?" Vorn asked, panic edging into his voice as multiple Kosians moved to surround him. Mira's instincts screamed danger. "I don't know, but something about you has triggered them. Your sample case, maybe, or—" She never finished the thought. The leader made a sharp gesture, and two Kosians seized Dr. Vorn, removing his sample case and rebreather in quick succession. The xenobiologist's scream was cut short, as another native pressed what appeared to be a jelly-like substance over his mouth and nose, not suffocating him. Mira realized with shock, but forming a transparent membrane that somehow allowed him to breathe while preventing speech. "Captain!" Rourke tensed, his hand moving toward his makeshift weapon. "Hold," Mira ordered, though every instinct urged intervention. "We're outnumbered 50-2, and we don't understand what's happening." The leader approached them, compound eyes shifting focus between Mira and Rourke. Then, with movements that seemed almost ceremonial, it placed one limb on each of their foreheads. The sensation was unlike anything Mira had experienced, a gentle pressure that somehow penetrated deeper than physical contact, accompanied by a subtle vibration that resonated through her skull. Images flooded her mind, not like memories or hallucinations, but direct sensory impressions that bypassed her optic nerves. She saw the Kosian colony as it had been before human arrival, a harmonious integration with the deadly ecosystem of the planet. She witnessed the first corporate survey ships, the careful way the Kosians had observed without revealing themselves. And most disturbingly, she experienced their discovery of test sites where corporate teams had deployed experimental mining techniques that had shattered entire crystal spires, releasing toxic compounds that poisoned vast swaths of jungle. "Telepathy," she gasped when the contact ended, staggering slightly. "They're psychic." Rourke steadied himself against a crystal formation, his weathered face pale. "I saw it too. They know exactly what the corporation is planning, and they know Vorn is part of it." The leader chittered something that resonated with meaning despite the language barrier, a question, an invitation for explanation. It gestured toward Dr. Vorn, who stood rigid with fear between his captors, then toward the sample case now open on the crystalline platform. Mira made a decision. Stepping forward, she pointed to Vorn, then made a cutting motion across her throat before pointing upward, toward the surface where the corporate dropship had landed. She then pressed her palm to her chest and shook her head emphatically. "Not with them," she said, knowing the words were meaningless but hoping the sentiment might translate. "We're not with them." The leader's compound eyes studied her face, body plates shifting through subtle patterns. Then it extended a limb toward the sample case. Retrieving the sabotaged component Mira had removed from the emergency beacon. With movements that conveyed understanding beyond language, it held the component in one limb, pointed to Vorn with another, then made a crushing gesture. "I think it's asking why he sabotaged our beacon," Rourke murmured. Mira nodded, then pointed to the corporate logo visible on equipment in the sample case. She mimicked digging motions, then gestured to the crystalline structures of the cavern, finishing with a smashing gesture. The leader's reaction confirmed her crude communication had been effective. It turned to address the gathered Kosians, its body plates shifting through complex patterns as it chittered and clicked. The response was immediate. The colony mobilized with purpose. Weapons were distributed, and preparations that could only be for defense began throughout the cavern. "We just started a war," Rourke observed quietly. "They were already at war," Mira corrected. "We just picked a side." The leader turned back to them, its attention now focused on the functioning emergency beacon still attached to Mira's belt. It pointed to the device, then upward toward the surface, its meaning clear. "It wants to know who's coming for us," Mira interpreted. "Federation or corporate." She held up one finger, pointed to the beacon, then to the sky, making a wide gesture to indicate a large ship. Then she held up two fingers, pointed to the corporate logo on Vorn's equipment, then to the direction of the dropship they'd observed. The leader processed this information, compound eyes adjusting as it considered. Then, with deliberate movements, it approached Dr. Vorn. The xenobiologist flinched as the Kosian leader placed a limb against his forehead, establishing the same telepathic connection Mira and Rourke had experienced. Vorn's eyes widened in terror, his body going rigid as the forced communication occurred. When the leader withdrew, the scientist collapsed to his knees, the membrane still covering his mouth, preventing any sound, but unable to mask the expression of horror on his face. "They got what they needed from him," Rourke guessed. "Whatever he knew about the corporate plans." The leader confirmed this with a gesture, then issued what appeared to be orders to its subordinates. Guide approached Mira and Rourke, indicating they should follow, while Vorn was led away by another group. "Wait," Mira called out, gesturing toward the xenobiologist. "Where are they taking him?" Guide made a series of gestures that conveyed confinement but not execution. Then it pointed to its own head, then to Vorn, then made a spiraling motion with one limb that somehow suggested continued interrogation. "They're going to keep picking his brain," Rourke translated roughly. "Can't say I blame them." Guide led them deeper into the cavern system, through tunnels whose crystalline walls pulsed with the same bioluminescence as the jungle fungi. The architecture became more deliberately structured the further they traveled, with carved chambers and what appeared to be living quarters branching off from the main passage. They finally emerged into a smaller chamber that had clearly been prepared for them. Cushioning made from processed fungal material formed beds, while containers of what appeared to be water and food had been arranged on a crystalline table. Guide gestured to the provisions, then to their rebreathers, making a removal motion. "It wants us to take off our gear," Mira said uncertainly. "Test the atmosphere?" Rourke retrieved a portable analyzer from his pack, waving it over the chamber air. Readings show acceptable oxygen levels, minimal toxins. The cavern environment is filtered somehow. Cautiously, Mira removed her rebreather, taking a shallow, experimental breath. The air tasted strange, metallic with undertones of something like cinnamon, but caused no immediate respiratory distress. "Breathable," she confirmed, rolling her shoulders as the weight of the equipment lifted. Guide seemed pleased by this development, its body plates shifting to patterns of blue and green that somehow conveyed approval. It approached a wall section where a crystalline panel had been installed, pressing several protrusions in sequence. The panel illuminated, projecting crude but recognizable schematics of the jungle surface above, specifically the area where the corporate dropship had landed. They're sharing intelligence, Mira realized, moving closer to study the projection. This is their tactical display. The projection showed the corporate base expanding rapidly, with what appeared to be heavy mining equipment being deployed around the nearest obsidian spire. More concerning were the symbols indicating weapon emplacements and perimeter defenses being established. "They're fortifying," Rourke observed grimly. "Standard corporate procedure for hostile environments. Once those defenses are fully operational, even a large force of natives won't be able to breach them." Guide chittered agreement, its compound eyes fixed on the projection. It pointed to a section of the display where the time cycle indicator suggested dawn, then made a series of gestures that conveyed movement and attack. "They're planning to strike at first light," Mira interpreted, "before the defenses are complete." Rourke studied the tactical display with the experienced eye of a career soldier. Even with surprise on their side, they'll take heavy casualties against corporate security. Those aren't rent-a-cops up there. They're likely ex-military contractors with top-of-the-line combat gear. Guide seemed to understand their concern, making an adjustment to the display that zoomed out to show a wider area of the jungle. It indicated multiple points surrounding the corporate position, then made a whistling sound similar to the alarm call they'd heard earlier. They're not planning a frontal assault, Mira realized. They're going to use the environment against the intruders. The ex-Marine nodded slowly, a new respect dawning in his eyes. Lure those rock flyers and other predators toward the corporate position, biological warfare, Kosian style. Guide's body plates shifted in what might have been satisfaction, compound eyes focusing on Mira as it made a series of gestures indicating the humans, then the surface, then the attack formation. "I think we're being invited to participate," Mira said, glancing at Rourke. "What do you think?" The ex-Marine considered for a moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he gestured to the corporate position on the display. "Those are your former colleagues up there, Captain. People like you used to be." "Exactly," Mira replied, memories surfacing of other corporate operations she'd been part of, extracting resources from frontier worlds with little regard for consequences, eliminating obstacles to quarterly profits, following orders that left her sleepless with guilt. "That's why I need to be there." Guide seemed to sense their decision, its body plates shifting to patterns of deep blue that somehow conveyed approval. It made a final adjustment to the display, highlighting a specific approach vector to the corporate position, then gestured for them to rest as it departed, leaving them alone in the chamber. Rourke settled onto one of the fungal cushions with a sigh. "You know, when I signed on for this expedition, I was expecting a standard survey operation, easy money, minimal risk." Mira smiled tiredly, checking her sidearm out of habit. "And instead you got a planetary war and alien allies. Sorry to disappoint." "Are you kidding?" The ex-Marine's grim humor surfaced again. "This is the most interesting contract I've had in years, though I'm pretty sure corporate won't be processing my hazard pay after this." Despite the danger looming ahead, Mira found herself laughing, a release of tension that felt almost alien after the intensity of their situation. "Get some rest, Rourke. Something tells me tomorrow's going to make today look like a corporate retreat." The ex-Marine settled back, closing his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Wake me when it's time to commit career suicide." Sleep came surprisingly easily in the quiet of the crystalline chamber, the gentle bioluminescence dimming to accommodate human circadian rhythms. Mira drifted into uneasy dreams filled with compound eyes and shifting plates, corporate logos melting into pools of acid, and the distant screams of predators hunting in the alien night. She woke to Guide's touch on her shoulder, compound eyes gleaming in the dim chamber. It was time. The Kosian attack plan, once fully communicated through a combination of the tactical display and elaborate gesture, revealed a sophistication that belied their primitive appearance. 3 groups would approach the corporate position from different vectors, each utilizing a specific method to draw Kos's predators toward the human intruders. Meanwhile, a 4th team, including Mira and Rourke, would use the distraction to infiltrate the dropship itself, disrupting communications and preventing an emergency extraction. They want us to sabotage the ship, Mira realized as Guide demonstrated the access points they would target. Because we understand human technology. Makes sense, Rourke acknowledged, checking the edge on his makeshift spear. Though I'd feel better about our chances with something more substantial than this pointy stick in your sidearm. As if anticipating this concern, Guide presented them with Kosian weapons, crystalline daggers similar to the ones they'd seen earlier, but these pulsed with a bioluminescent core that hummed with energy. Vibroblades, Mira identified, carefully accepting one. They've adapted their natural technology to match functionality with ours. Guide led them through tunnels that gradually ascended toward the surface, joined by 6 Kosian warriors whose body plates had been painted with patterns that rendered them nearly invisible against the crystalline walls. The group emerged into the jungle through a concealed opening just as Kos's crimson sun breached the horizon, casting long shadows through the fungal canopy. The corporate position was visible in the distance, harsh, angular structures contrasting with the organic forms of the jungle. Floodlights cut through the morning mist, illuminating a perimeter that had been cleared of vegetation. Heavy mining equipment stood ready to deploy, while armed guards patrolled at regular intervals. Typical corporate efficiency, Mira observed bitterly. Less than 24 hours on planet, and they're ready to start extraction. Guide gestured for silence, its compound eyes focused on the sky. In the distance, the first sounds of the coordinated attack began, a series of whistles and calls that mimicked the hunting cries of the flying rock creatures, but with subtle variations that Mira now recognized as deliberate communication. The corporate security forces reacted immediately, perimeter lights swinging toward the disturbance as guards moved to defensive positions. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the jungle erupted in chaos as promised, not just the flying predators, but dozens of other Kosian species converging on the corporate position from multiple directions. "That's our cue," Rourke murmured as the guards opened fire on the biological onslaught, their attention fixed outward. Guide led them through the underbrush with uncanny stealth, its body plates shifting to match the surrounding vegetation. They skirted the main defensive perimeter, approaching the dropship from its least guarded angle, the exhaust vents where the engine's heat signature would mask their approach from thermal scanners. The first real obstacle came in the form of a lone guard stationed at the ship's maintenance access hatch. Guide paused, assessing the situation, then made a series of hand signals to its warriors. 2 Kosians detached from the group, circling wide to create a distraction while the main party waited. A moment later, the sound of breaking vegetation drew the guard's attention. He raised his rifle, peering into the jungle's edge where bioluminescent spores had been disturbed in a pattern too regular to be natural. As he moved to investigate, Guide signaled the advance. Mira and Rourke followed the Kosians to the access hatch, where Guide demonstrated unexpected familiarity with human technology by manipulating the external emergency release. The hatch slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the ship's engineering section. "They've studied our tech before," Mira whispered as they slipped inside. "That's not first contact behavior." "Corporate's been here longer than they admitted," Rourke agreed grimly. "Probably multiple survey missions before our official expedition." The interior of the dropship was standard corporate design, utilitarian, efficient, with minimal crew amenities and maximum cargo capacity. Guide led them through the engineering section toward the command module, pausing at intersections to confirm their route was clear. They had almost reached the communications array when disaster struck. A technician emerged unexpectedly from a side compartment, freezing in shock at the sight of the alien boarding party. Before anyone could react, he slammed his palm against a wall-mounted alarm panel. Klaxons blared throughout the ship as emergency lighting bathed the corridor in pulsing red. Guide emitted a sharp whistle, and the Kosian warriors immediately shifted to combat posture, crystalline weapons humming with activation energy. "So much for stealth," Rourke grunted, readying his own weapons. Mira drew her sidearm, taking point as they pushed forward toward the communications array. "New plan. Get to the bridge, lock it down, and hold position until the Kosians finish their attack outside." They encountered resistance almost immediately, 2 security officers responding to the alarm, armored and wielding corporate-issue pulse rifles. The confined space of the corridor worked against the humans. However, as the Kosians demonstrated their evolutionary adaptation to Kosa's treacherous environment, they moved along walls and ceiling with equal facility, their 6 limbs allowing combat maneuvers impossible for bipedal opponents. The security officers managed a single volley before being overwhelmed, their armor providing little protection against the vibrating crystalline blades that found seams and joints with terrifying precision. "We need one alive," Mira ordered as they reached the sealed bulkhead leading to the bridge, "for access codes." Guide seemed to understand, restraining a warrior that would have delivered a killing blow to the second officer. Instead, the Kosian pinned the man against the bulkhead, compound eyes fixed on his face in a stare that conveyed menace despite its alienness. "Bridge access. Now." Mira pressed her sidearm under the officer's chin, recognizing the corporate security uniform, identical to one she'd worn herself not so long ago. "Or my friend here gets creative with those extra limbs." The officer's eyes darted between Mira and the Kosian, calculation giving way to self-preservation. "Traitor," he spat, but his trembling hand entered the access code on the bulkhead panel. The bridge doors slid open to reveal a scene of controlled chaos, the command crew monitoring external feeds of the attack, the captain barking orders into a communications headset. They all turned at the intrusion, reaching for weapons that came up too late. What followed was brief but brutal. The Kosian warriors swarmed the bridge with inhuman speed, disarming the crew before they could mount an effective defense. Guide directed the operation with silent efficiency, compound eyes constantly tracking positions and threats. Mira approached the captain, who glared at her with undisguised contempt. "Captain Shen, corporate security said you'd gone rogue. I didn't believe you'd sink this low." "Funny thing about perspective, Captain," Mira replied, gesturing to the external feeds showing the devastation as Kosian predators tore through the mining camp. "From where I'm standing, you're the invaders." She turned to the communications officer, who sat frozen at his station. "Shut down all transmissions, now." "Too late," the captain said with grim satisfaction. "Distress call already went out. Orbital support inbound in 20 minutes. Heavy weapons, drop troops, the works." Mira exchanged a glance with Guide, whose body plates had shifted to patterns of deep red. Alarm, she now recognized. "Can we jam their communications?" Rourke had already moved to the tactical station, accessing the system with the expertise of someone who'd served on similar vessels. "Negative. They're using quantum-entangled comms. Can't be jammed." "Then we need to evacuate," Mira decided. "Get your people clear. Guide, orbital strikes will flatten this entire area." The Kosian leader seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, but instead of retreating, it approached the main view screen, manipulating controls with surprising dexterity to bring up a tactical display of the region. With deliberate movements, it indicated the obsidian spires, then made a series of gestures that conveyed structural integrity and interconnection. The spires, Mira interpreted, studying the display. They're all connected underground, part of a larger structure. Guide confirmed this with a gesture, then pointed to the mining equipment deployed around the nearest spire. It made a braking motion, followed by a sweeping gesture across the entire display. Rourke whistled low. They're saying if corporate starts blasting, they could destabilize the entire subterranean network, including the caverns where their colony lives, Mira finished, the stakes suddenly escalating beyond a simple territorial dispute. This isn't just about resources anymore, it's genocide. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Even the corporate captain seemed affected, his earlier contempt giving way to unease. You need to recall that orbital strike, Mira told him, her voice leaving no room for argument. Now. I can't, he replied, and for once, the corporate bravado had vanished. The protocols are automated. Once a distress call with the proper authentication goes out, the response is locked in. Standard procedure for high-value extraction operations on hostile worlds. Mira checked the tactical clock. 17 minutes until impact. Then we evacuate. Everyone. She turned to Guide. Can your people reach the deep caverns in time, below the blast zone? The Kosion's response was unexpected. Instead of signaling retreat, it approached the engineering station, manipulating controls to bring up schematics of the dropship itself. With precise movements, it highlighted the vessel's shield generators and atmospheric thrusters, then pointed to the nearest obsidian spire. I don't understand, Mira admitted, studying the display. Rourke, however, was nodding slowly. Crazy, but it might work. They want to use the dropship's shields to protect the spire from the initial bombardment. If we can position the ship directly above the main structure and reroute all power to the defensive systems. We'd need to overload the cores, the corporate captain interjected, professional interest momentarily overriding his hostility. The shields would fail after the first salvo, but if they're at maximum intensity, they might deflect enough energy to preserve the spire's structural integrity. Guide confirmed this interpretation with emphatic gestures, body plates shifting to patterns of deep blue, urgency tinged with hope. It's suicide for whoever stays on the ship, Mira pointed out. The shield overload would trigger a cascade failure in the main reactor. A moment of heavy silence fell over the bridge. Then, to everyone's surprise, Dr. Vorn's voice came from the doorway. I'll do it. The xenobiologist stood flanked by Kosion warriors, his earlier terror replaced by a strange calm. The membrane had been removed from his mouth, allowing him to speak, though his hands remained bound. Doctor, Mira acknowledged, surprise evident in her voice. I thought you were being held for questioning. I was, Vorn replied, his gaze dropping momentarily. They showed me everything. What corporate really planned. What would happen to this world, to these people? The projected casualties were deemed acceptable losses for the quarterly profit targets. He looked up, meeting Mira's eyes with newfound resolve. I've been complicit in this from the beginning, falsifying survey data, concealing evidence of sentient life, sabotaging our emergency beacon. I thought I was serving science, but you were just serving corporate interests, Mira finished for him. Vorn nodded, a bitter smile touching his lips. My research division, my executive suite, my stock options, all bought with blood I pretended not to see. He glanced at the tactical clock. 15 minutes remaining. Let me do this one thing right. Guide studied the xenobiologist with its compound eyes. body plates shifting through patterns that somehow conveyed both suspicion and recognition. It approached Vorn, placing a limb against his forehead in that now familiar gesture of telepathic communion. When it withdrew, its posture had changed, the hostile angles replaced by something that, despite the alien physiology, read unmistakably as acceptance. "He's genuine," Mira interpreted, receiving confirmation in Guide's body language. "But Doctor, you can't possibly—" "I know exactly what I'm doing, Captain," Vorn interrupted, moving to the engineering station with surprising confidence. "These ship systems are standard Cortex dynamics design. I can initiate the overload sequence and position the vessel. The rest of you need to evacuate immediately." Rourke had already begun coordinating with the Kosian warriors, organizing the bridge crew for rapid evacuation. "What about the mining camp personnel?" "Already retreating to the dropship landing zone," the corporate captain reported, checking tactical displays. "Standard procedure during a predator incursion." "Then we need to redirect them," Mira decided. "Guide, can your people lead the corporate workers to safety, away from the blast zone?" The Kosian leader considered this request, compound eyes adjusting as it processed the implications. Then, with deliberate movements, it agreed, issuing orders to its warriors through patterns of shifting body plates and chittering vocalizations. "Dr. Vorn," Mira approached the xenobiologist, who was already deep into shield reconfiguration protocols. "Are you certain about this?" He didn't look up from his work, fingers flying across the control interfaces. "For once in my career, Captain, I'm absolutely certain. Now go. You have 12 minutes to clear the impact zone." The evacuation proceeded with surprising efficiency, corporate personnel and Kosian warriors moving together under the common threat of orbital bombardment. Guide led Mira and Rourke through access tunnels beneath the mining camp, collecting survivors along the way, both human workers who had survived the Predator attack and Kosian warriors who had participated in the assault. "Never thought I'd see the day," Rourke muttered as they hurried through a crystalline passage, corporate engineers side by side with the natives they'd been prepared to displace. "Enemies to allies in under an hour. Amazing what a common extinction event can accomplish," Mira replied, checking her wrist display. 8 minutes remaining. They emerged into a vast cavern system far from the initial colony chamber, deep enough that the ground no longer trembled with the approaching doom. Hundreds of Kosians had already gathered there, along with the remaining corporate personnel who had been guided to safety by warriors displaying patterns of truce on their body plates. Guide led them to a central platform where the colony leader waited, its compound eyes tracking the new arrivals with unreadable alien intensity. A moment of tension stretched as corporate security forces found themselves face to face with the beings they'd been sent to eradicate. Then the colony leader did something unexpected. It approached the corporate captain, extending a limb not in threat, but in a gesture unmistakably adapted from human custom, a handshake. After a moment's hesitation, the captain accepted the alien appendage. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "The survey reported no sentient life." "Because that's what they wanted it to report," Mira interjected, her years in corporate security lending weight to her words. Plausible deniability for the executives who signed the extraction orders. Standard procedure. Guide activated a crystalline device that projected a countdown synchronized with Mira's wrist display. 4 minutes remaining. The cavern fell silent as the implications sank in. Somewhere above, Dr. Vorn was positioning the dropship over the main spire, preparing to sacrifice himself to save both species from corporate expediency. "What happens after?" Rourke asked, giving voice to the question hovering unspoken. "If this works, if the spire holds, corporate will send another expedition," the captain acknowledged grimly. "Standard procedure, asset recovery first, then continued extraction operations with increased security protocols. Unless they have reason to abandon the operation entirely, Mira countered, an idea forming. She turned to Guide. The emergency beacon is still active, still broadcasting on all Federation channels. The Kosian's compound eyes adjusted, body plates shifting in patterns that somehow conveyed understanding despite the alien physiology. It chittered something to the colony leader, who responded with rapid movements of multiple limbs. "I think I've got a plan," Mira announced, addressing both human and Kosian listeners. "But we'll need to move fast after the bombardment, if Vorn succeeds." The rest of her words were lost as the cavern trembled violently, crystalline formations vibrating with transmitted energy from far above. The countdown had reached 0. The orbital strike had begun. For nearly a minute, the underground sanctuary shook with the fury of corporate weapons designed to clear hostile environments for resource extraction. Dust and crystal fragments showered from the ceiling as support structures groaned under stresses they were never meant to endure. Then, gradually, the tremors subsided. Guide's projection updated with a damage assessment that showed the main spire still standing, damaged but intact, its critical support structures preserved by the dropship's sacrificial shield. "He did it," Rourke murmured, genuine respect in his gruff voice. "The crazy bastard actually did it." Mira allowed herself a moment of silent acknowledgement for Vorn's redemption, then refocused on the crisis at hand. "We have a short window before corporate realizes their initial strike failed. We need to move now." The plan came together with surprising speed, corporate technical expertise combining with Kosian knowledge of the planet's unique properties. While Rourke led a team to recover the emergency beacon from the impact zone, Mira worked with the corporate communications specialists to modify it for maximum broadcast strength. "We're going to tell the truth," she explained to the assembled group. "All of it, the falsified surveys, the concealed evidence of sentient life, the attempted genocide disguised as resource extraction, will transmit directly to the Federation Council, with enough supporting evidence that not even Cortex Dynamics' army of lawyers can bury it. They'll blacklist everyone involved," the corporate captain warned, though he made no move to interfere. "Standard procedure for whistleblowers. No corporation in the sector will hire any of us again." "Better unemployed than complicit in genocide," Mira replied, surprised by how easily the words came, how right they felt after years of following orders that had left her soul corroded like metal in Kos's toxic atmosphere. Guide approached her, body plates shifting through patterns she now recognized as approval tinged with curiosity. It gestured to the modified beacon, then to the surface, then made a series of movements that conveyed a question about the future. "What happens to Kos after?" Mira interpreted. "If our plan works, the Federation will classify this planet as protected territory. No corporate exploitation allowed. Your people will be safe." The Kosian seemed satisfied with this answer, but then made another series of gestures, touching its chest, then Mira's, then indicating the sky with a sweeping motion of multiple limbs. "I think," Rourke said slowly, watching the exchange, "our friend is asking if you'll stay after the dust settles." The question caught Mira off guard. She'd been so focused on immediate survival, on stopping the corporate machine, that she hadn't considered what would come next. Return to Federation space as a blacklisted whistleblower, seek anonymous work on the frontier where corporate reach was limited? Before she could formulate a response, the colony leader approached, flanked by what appeared to be a council of elders. It carried a crystalline object that pulsed with bioluminescent energy, a concentrated version of the natural technology they'd observed throughout Kosian society. With ceremonial movements, it presented the object to Mira. When she accepted it, the crystal reorganized itself in her hands, forming a structure that somehow interfaced with her neural patterns. Images flooded her mind, not memories this time, but possibilities. A future where human technology and Kosian biological engineering evolved together, where the deadly challenges of the Deathworld became opportunities for innovation rather than obstacles to overcome. A symbiotic colony, she breathed as the vision faded, looking up to meet the compound eyes of the colony leader. Humans and Kosians, learning from each other. Guide confirmed this interpretation with body plates shifting to patterns of deep blue. Hope, she now understood. It pointed to the corporate personnel, then to the Kosian warriors, then made a gesture that somehow conveyed strength through unity. They're offering us asylum, Mira explained to the assembled humans. A chance to build something new here, together. The corporate captain considered this proposition, professional skepticism warring with the undeniable evidence of Kosian capabilities. Corporate will never allow it. They'll send extraction forces regardless of Federation classification. Let them come. Rourke grinned, gesturing to the Kosian warriors whose natural armor had withstood weapons designed to penetrate military-grade plating. I'd like to see corporate security go up against these folks with home field advantage. As if to emphasize his point, one of the warriors demonstrated the defensive capabilities of its shifting plates, repelling a projectile in a display that drew appreciative whistles from the human security personnel. We could learn from each other, a corporate engineer suggested, already studying the crystalline technology with professional interest. Their biological engineering, combined with our industrial methods. A new kind of colony. Mira agreed, the possibilities expanding in her mind, not exploitation, but true cooperation. Guide seemed pleased by this development, its body plates shifting to patterns of approval as it conferred with the colony leader. After a brief exchange, it returned to Mira with what appeared to be a final proposition, conveyed through elaborate gestures that indicated leadership, negotiation, and the connection between their species. I think, Rourke translated, watching the exchange with growing amusement, you're being offered a diplomatic position, Captain, Ambassador to the Kosians. Mira looked around at the unlikely alliance forming in the crystalline cavern, corporate workers and alien warriors, engineers and hunters, humans adapting to a world classified as too dangerous to inhabit, and natives whose evolutionary path had prepared them for exactly these conditions. Tell them I accept, she said finally, extending her hand to Guide in the human gesture it had learned, on one condition, that Lieutenant Rourke serves as security chief for our new colony. The ex-Marine barked a laugh. From corporate gun to alien diplomat in under 48 hours. That's got to be some kind of career speed record. As Guide's limb clasped Mira's in the formal acceptance of her terms, the emergency beacon activated, broadcasting their message to the Federation Council. The truth about Kos, about corporate machinations, about the intelligent species that had evolved to thrive in conditions humans had deemed uninhabitable. Hours later, as the first Federation response ships entered orbit, Mira stood with Guide at the entrance to the colony cavern, watching Kos's crimson sun set behind the damaged but enduring obsidian spire. The structure gleamed with new significance, no longer merely a mineral deposit to be exploited, but a symbol of resistance and adaptation. You know, she said conversationally to her alien companion, where I come from, there's an old saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Guide's compound eyes adjusted as it processed this concept, body plates shifting through patterns that suggested contemplation. Your people evolved on a world that should have killed you 1,000 times over, Mira continued, gesturing to the deadly beauty of the Kosian landscape. Instead, it made you into something remarkable, something we can learn from. The Kosian's response was to extend a limb toward the horizon, where the first stars were becoming visible in Kos's darkening sky. It made a series of gestures that conveyed vastness, possibility, and shared journey. Yes, Mira agreed, understanding perfectly despite the absence of words. The future together. As if to punctuate this sentiment, a distant call echoed across the jungle canopy, the hunting cry of the flying rock creatures that had destroyed their shuttle and set this unlikely alliance in motion. Once a sound of terror, now a reminder of the extraordinary adaptability of life, even on a world too dangerous for classification. And somewhere in that deadly, beautiful landscape, humanity had found not just survival, but a new kind of home.